$50 an hour sounds like a lifeline until you realize you're the bait. At the Vancroft Institute for Advanced Research, the night shift doesn't just come with rules. It comes with rituals. Don't answer the phone if your dead grandmother calls. Don't open the door no matter who's begging. And never ever look straight at the cameras. This job doesn't test your skills. It tests your identity. And if you forget who you are, something else will take your place. Welcome to the last job you'll ever remember. I arrived 20 minutes early for my interview at the Vancroft Institute for Advanced Research, more out of habit than strategy. Years of nursing school had drilled punctuality into my bones, even if I never got the chance to finish. The waiting room was sterile, quiet, and too bright, lit by buzzing fluorescent panels that cast a washed-out glow on everything. A receptionist sat behind a marble desk, absorbed in something on his screen. He didn't look up when I signed in or when I took a seat across the room. I shifted uncomfortably in the stiff leather chair, adjusting the hem of my skirt for the fourth time. I'd spent the morning rehearsing answers to every standard interview question I could think of, even though this wasn't exactly the kind of job I'd pictured for myself. A night receptionist gig, 10-hour shifts, 4 nights a week. It wasn't glamorous, but at $30 an hour, it was the only thing standing between my mother and another missed chemo appointment. The hallway door clicked open precisely at 2 p.m., and a man stepped out. He was tall, gaunt, and moved like someone rehearsing each motion. His suit was tailored so sharply it almost cut the air around him. His posture was ramrod straight, and his skin had the pale, waxy quality of someone who never spent time in the sun. He looked directly at me, without blinking, I noted, and said, "Miss Zhao?" I stood quickly, extending my hand. "Yes, Mira Zhao. Nice to meet you." He didn't take my hand. Instead, he turned and gestured toward the hallway. "Follow me." I dropped my hand awkwardly and followed him past a placard that read Administrative Offices. As we walked, I stole glances at the framed images lining the walls. Scientific diagrams, satellite photos, and charts labeled in symbols I didn't recognize. The floor was so clean it reflected our footsteps like a mirror. His office was pristine, unnervingly so. Not a pen out of place, not a speck of dust on the surface of his obsidian black desk. The blinds were half drawn, letting in slats of afternoon light that dissected the room into harsh geometric lines. He gestured for me to sit. I did, clutching the folder with my resume and references on my lap. "My name is Holden Roke," he said, settling into his seat with mechanical grace. "You've applied for the overnight reception position, correct?" "Yes," I said, smiling. It seemed like a great opportunity. He raised a hand slightly. "Let's skip the pleasantries. I've reviewed your background. 2 years of nursing school, strong academic record, forced withdrawal due to financial hardship, no criminal history, excellent attention to detail, and high compliance ratings in your previous work." I blinked. "Yes, that's correct. Compliance is critical," he said. "Obedience more so. The work we do here is sensitive, classified even. We require personnel who follow rules without exception. If you cannot do that, now is the time to leave." The air in the room seemed to shift. Something cold and clinical settled between us. I swallowed. "I can follow rules," I said. Roke studied me for a long moment, then opened a drawer and retrieved a thin manila folder and a thick black binder. He slid the folder toward me. "This is your employment contract," he said, tapping the folder. $30 per hour, 10-hour shifts, 4 nights a week, midnight to 10 a.m. This," he placed the binder atop the folder, "is the procedural handbook for night reception staff. Review both before signing. Your performance and your safety depend on your comprehension of every page." My heart thudded, but I nodded. I hadn't even started yet, and already something felt wrong. The binder looked ordinary enough. Black. Faux leather. No label, no logo. I opened it slowly as Mr. Roke settled back in his chair, folding his hands like a man who had done this many times before. The first pages were standard. Emergency contact protocols, phone extensions for internal departments, instructions for using the intercom. I almost let myself relax. But halfway through the binder, the tone changed. The next section was titled Mandatory Protocols. The font was larger, bolded and underlined. My eyes drifted down the list. Do not accept any deliveries after 11 p.m. If you receive a phone call from someone claiming to be a deceased relative, hang up immediately. Do not open the front entrance doors for any individual between midnight and 6 a.m., regardless of identification or security clearance. Do not look directly at the security monitors, peripheral vision only. If the overhead lights flicker more than 3 times in succession, immediately proceed to the archive room in the basement and lock the door. I paused, heart thudding. I looked up at Roke, who returned my gaze with an unreadable expression. Is this a joke? No, he said flatly. But the grandmother part, how would you even know? He cut me off. Every night shift staff member receives a variation of these instructions tailored to their psychological profile. Some of our research involves exposure to cognitively hazardous phenomena, patterns, sounds, visuals that can trigger neurological effects. The rules are not arbitrary. Miss Zhao, they are designed to keep you alive. He said it without drama, without emphasis, just as a fact. I turned back to the binder. More rules. If the phone rings 13 times, do not answer it. Instead, pour a circle of salt around your workstation and remain within it until sunrise. Do not respond to any sound coming from inside the supply closet. Do not attempt to open it. If you see your own reflection moving independently of your actions, contact your supervisor using the blue button beneath the desk. There was even a diagram of the lobby layout with annotations, blind spots on the cameras, emergency exits, the location of a hidden key to the archive room. I felt my throat tighten. Was this performance art? A psychological evaluation? Some elaborate stress test? But then I remembered my bank account balance and my mother's medication schedule. $30 an hour would keep the power on. $50 an hour if there was ever a raise could save her life. Any questions? Roke asked. I had 100. Why was any of this necessary? What kind of research was happening here? Why me? But I found myself saying, no. He stood and slid the contract closer. If you are available tonight, your first shift begins at midnight. There will be no further orientation. Review the binder thoroughly. Protocols are non-negotiable. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled only slightly as I signed the line at the bottom of the page. When I looked up, he was already walking toward the door. My first shift at the Vancroft Institute began just before midnight. I arrived 10 minutes early, the parking lot nearly empty under a half-lit sky. The building loomed ahead like a monolith, cold steel and glass, its sleek exterior betraying nothing of what might be happening inside. As I stepped through the front entrance with my newly issued keycard, I couldn't help but feel the air shift, just a few degrees cooler, just a little too still. The night security guard on duty, an older man named Ellis, gave me a brief nod from his post by the elevator. Reception's on the first floor, west wing, he said. Everything's prepped. Quiet nights mostly. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe strange lights, odd sounds, something to validate the weirdness of the handbook. But the lobby was pristine and silent. My desk sat in the center of the space like a command station, 3 monitors, an intercom, a multi-line phone system, and 2 buttons mounted under the lip of the desk, 1 blue, 1 red. The red connected directly to emergency services. The blue was for protocol violations. I stared at it longer than I meant to. The first night passed without incident. I did my rounds at the top of each hour, logging environmental readings, checking that restricted areas remained locked, and walking the perimeter of the lobby. I followed the handbook's instructions to the letter, even the weird ones. When I checked the camera feeds, I looked only out of the corner of my eyes. When the phone rang once at 3:42 a.m. and then stopped, I made a note of it in the logbook, just as instructed. No one called back. By the end of the shift, I had read through half of the procedural handbook again, just to be sure I hadn't missed anything. When the clock on the monitor clicked over to 10 a.m., I grabbed my coat and headed out. The same guard from earlier waved me off. "Still alive?" he joked. I managed a tired smile. The second night was even quieter. I brought a paperback novel and a thermos of tea. By 2 a.m., I'd finished all of my checklist items. The lights never flickered. The phone never rang. No late-night researchers wandered through the halls. At one point, I thought I saw a flicker of movement on one of the monitors, a shadow sliding across the east hallway. But when I blinked and looked again, it was gone. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I didn't. Still, nothing violated the rules. Stayed at my desk. I didn't touch the cameras, I didn't answer any calls, and yet as I sat there alone, surrounded by silent machines and humming lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Something just outside the reach of the cameras, just outside the rules, waiting for me to break one. By the time my third night at the Vancroft Institute rolled around, the routine had begun to settle into muscle memory. Swipe in, log the environmental readings, walk the perimeter, scan the cameras peripherally, record everything, follow every rule. I knew the binder nearly by heart now. The strange directives no longer felt strange. They were simply what the job required. But something about the third night felt off. It started with a smell. Faint at first, not unpleasant exactly, but strange, like antiseptic mixed with something metallic. It clung to the air near the hallway that led to the archive room. I paused during my first walkthrough and sniffed, trying to place it. It didn't seem strong enough to trigger an alarm, so I logged it as an unusual scent near West Hallway. Still, it lingered in the back of my mind. At 1 a.m., I sat at my desk sipping lukewarm tea from my thermos, trying to focus on the paperback I'd brought. But the words refused to settle. I kept glancing up, not at the cameras directly, but at the space above them. The hallway to my left, the faint reflection in the glass doors. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone, even though everything told me I was. By 2:10, I began hearing soft sounds, barely audible through the thick silence. A shuffle, a whisper of motion, a click that might have been the ventilation system or might not have been. I checked the security feed with peripheral glances, just as the handbook instructed. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. And yet, I couldn't shake the crawling sensation across my skin, like invisible threads pulling gently at the edges of my awareness. I turned the page in my book 3 times without reading a single word. At 2:43 a.m., the lobby lights flickered once, brief and sharp, like a warning. My heart stopped. I sat, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the overhead fluorescence. One flicker, not 3, not enough to trigger the protocol. I waited. 10 seconds, 20. No more flickers. I exhaled slowly, shoulders tight, and wrote it down in the logbook. That's when I noticed the blue button under the desk had a faint glow around it. It wasn't lit, not fully, just a soft hum of light, like it was warming up, anticipating use. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the hair rise on the back of my neck. I didn't touch it. The handbook hadn't mentioned anything about the button glowing on its own. No alarms had sounded. No protocol had been broken. Still, I didn't move for the rest of my shift. I sat completely still, hands folded, eyes fixed on the clock until it finally turned to 10:04 a.m. And when I left the building that morning, I walked faster than I had the 2 nights before. I didn't look back, but I had the uneasy feeling that something had definitely looked at me. The 4th night started like the others, quiet, clinical, predictable. I arrived a few minutes early, passed through security without incident, and settled into my desk beneath the hum of overhead lights. I was trying not to let the previous night's unease get to me, but there was a heaviness now that hadn't been there before. It clung to the walls like fog, or maybe that was just my imagination catching up with me. I went through the motions, checked environmental readings, logged the entry timestamps, glanced at the security monitors from the corner of my eye. Nothing seemed out of place. Even the scent that had disturbed me the night before was gone. The lobby looked exactly as it always did. Too clean, too quiet, too empty. By 1:17 a.m., I had completed all my rounds. I was halfway through a chapter of my book, my focus flitting between the lines and the ambient whir of ventilation systems, when the phone rang. It wasn't startling, just unexpected. In the last 3 shifts, the phone had never rung once. But this call didn't feel like a normal one. The ring was old-fashioned, analog, shrill and echoing. I stared at the caller ID. It read, "Unknown." With my heart beginning to race, I picked up the receiver just like the handbook instructed. Vancroft Institute, Night Reception. This is Mira Zhao speaking. There was silence on the other end. 3 seconds, 4. Then a voice. "Xiaomei, is that you?" My throat closed. I hadn't heard that name in years. No one called me that anymore, no one alive anyway. "Nai," I whispered, forgetting protocol in an instant. A warm chuckle answered me, so familiar it physically hurt. "Of course it's me, little Plum. Who else would call you that?" I froze, knuckles white around the phone. The voice wasn't just similar, it was exact. The subtle accent, the cadence, the pet name she used only when tucking me into bed as a child. My grandmother had died 5 years ago. I had held her hand in the hospital when the machine stopped. This isn't possible," I said. "You're gone. You died." "Such nonsense," she replied gently, with just a hint of mock scolding. "You always were too stubborn to listen even when you were small. Have you been eating properly, sweetheart? You sound tired." A cold wave spread from the center of my chest. It was perfect. Her voice was perfect. Down to the inflections, the pauses, the concern. And somehow that perfection made it all the more terrifying. I remembered the rule. If you receive a call from someone claiming to be a deceased relative, hang up immediately. But how could anyone or anything know to impersonate her? And how could it replicate every tiny nuance so flawlessly? "I miss you," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "But you're not real. You can't be." "Oh, Xiaomei," she said, her voice thick with something that sounded like sadness. "I've been away, but I'm trying to come back to you. I left something for you in the basement, a small package behind the paper towels. It will help me find my way home." The basement, the archive room, the same place I was supposed to go if the lights flickered 3 times. My grip on the receiver tightened. My heart said yes. My training screamed no. "You dropped the jade pendant when you were 16, she continued, her tone conspiratorial. "Chipped it on the kitchen tiles. You cried for hours. I told you it was lucky. Do you remember?" I reached up to my neck, feeling the cool curve of the pendant beneath my blouse. The chip was there. No one else knew that story. Not even my mother. "Please, Xiaomei," she whispered. "Just go check. Just this once." I felt the world tilt slightly, like I was standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible. I didn't hang up. Not yet. The phone receiver trembled in my hand. I gripped it so tightly my knuckles ached, but I couldn't make myself let go. The voice on the other end. It wasn't just a mimicry, it wasn't just convincing. It was her. Somehow. Every breath, every phrase carried with it the warmth of childhood, the comfort of familiarity, the illusion of safety. But somewhere beneath that softness was something else. An edge I hadn't noticed at first. A quiet insistence that felt increasingly wrong. "I need your help, Xiaomei," she said again gently, like she was afraid I might disappear. "The package, it's not far, just down in the basement, behind the paper towels. You remember where that is, don't you?" I did remember. Mr. Roke had shown me during orientation, pointed it out as the designated safe zone in case of system anomalies. But something about her words now made the memory feel corrupted. That spot was meant for protection, not delivery. "Drops, I'm not supposed to leave the desk," I said quietly, my voice more for me than her. "You were never one to blindly follow rules," she said with a teasing lilt. "Remember the time you cut your own bangs before New Year's photos? Your mother was furious, but I thought you looked adorable." That memory hit like a punch to the chest. I hadn't thought about it in years. I hadn't told anyone about it in over a decade. And yet she described it perfectly. The tiny scissors, the uneven fringe, the way I'd cried until she showed me how to smile for the camera anyway. A sick sensation crept up my spine. Not just fear, but betrayal. Whoever, whatever this was, it had access to the deepest corners of my mind. The details it pulled weren't just for show, they were weapons. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Because I've always known you, Mira," the voice said, lower now, coaxing. "I've never stopped watching over you, but I need you to help me come back. I left something for you. You'll see. It will all make sense once you go downstairs." I pushed my chair back, not because I intended to move, but because I needed space from the voice. The monitor lights cast long shadows across the floor, and my reflection in the lobby glass looked distorted. Almost. Smaller, like a child. "Why now?" I whispered. "Why tonight?" "Because tonight you're ready," she said. "You're stronger now, brave enough to open the door." There was a pause. Silence pressed against the receiver. Then her voice changed, just a fraction, a subtle shift in cadence, as if whoever was behind it was running out of patience. "Go to the basement, Mira, don't make me ask again." And there it was, the mask slipping. My hand moved slowly, deliberately. I took a breath, then placed the receiver back into its cradle. It clicked down with a finality that echoed louder than the ring ever had. For a moment, there was only the sound of my breathing. Then the phone rang again, once, twice, 13 times. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached beneath the desk and opened the drawer containing the salt jar. My hands shook as I poured a circle around my chair. The handbook hadn't lied. The rules were there for a reason. Not superstition, not paranoia, protection. As I sat back down and stared straight ahead, the silence returned. But this time, it was sharper, more watchful. The kind of silence that waits. I thought of my real grandmother, her hands, her laughter, the smell of jasmine tea and hand lotion. I thought of the dead and the living, and how easy it was to blur the line between the two when you're desperate. Enough! And I thought of the voice on the phone, which still hung in the air like a ghost, waiting for me to pick it up again. When my shift ended at 10 a.m., I didn't go straight home like I normally did. I didn't even stop to change out of my uniform jacket or grab breakfast from the vending machine. Instead, I walked directly to Mr. Roke's office, the contract, folder still clutched under my arm like a talisman. My legs felt like they were moving on their own, propelled by a cocktail of exhaustion and something else, urgency maybe, or the residual dread still clinging to my skin from the night before. I didn't know how to describe what had happened on that call, only that I couldn't carry it alone anymore. His door was partially open, and he sat at his desk as though he'd never moved. Crisp suit, straight spine, fingers steepled over. A closed folder. He didn't look up when I knocked. "Miss Zhao," he said without inflection, "I assume this is not a casual visit." "No," I said, stepping inside. "It's about last night." He motioned silently to the chair across from him. I sat, my hands clasped tight in my lap. "At 1:17 a.m., I began, "I received a phone call from an unknown number. The caller claimed to be my grandmother." His eyes flicked up at that just briefly. "Did you engage?" Yes. Longer than I should have. She, or it, knew things. Personal things. Childhood memories. Stories no one else could have possibly known. "And did the caller attempt to persuade you to act against protocol?" "Yes," I said. She told me to retrieve a package from the basement storage room behind the paper towels. That got a reaction." Roke's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. He stood abruptly, walked over to the door and closed it with a quiet click. When he returned, his face had shifted just a fraction, less formal, more alert. "You did not retrieve it?" "No. I stayed at my post." "Good." He nodded once. "That's very good, Miss Zhao. Most don't the first time." I blinked. The first time, he didn't answer directly. Instead, he opened a drawer and withdrew a plain envelope, placing it on the desk between us. "This is a bonus for your compliance under stress, as per your contract." I stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. What was that voice, Mr. Roke? How did it know everything? He adjusted his cuffs, as if preparing to speak about something uncomfortable. "The Institute conducts research into phenomena that exist beyond conventional scientific understanding. Occasionally, those phenomena manifest in forms that exploit emotional familiarity." I frowned. "You mean they impersonate the people we miss the most?" He gave a small nod. "Loss creates openings. Regret creates weakness. And certain entities are very good at studying both." I felt something deep inside me twist. "So the rules exist for your protection," he finished, "and for the integrity of the containment procedures in this facility." I sat back, breath catching in my throat. This job wasn't about answering phones or watching cameras. It was about surviving things that shouldn't exist. Mr. Roke didn't blink as I sat across from him, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. The word entities echoed in my head like something too large to define. It felt clinical, abstract, an attempt to apply a sterile label to something inherently terrifying. But the thing that called me in the night hadn't felt abstract. It had felt personal, intimate, and the implications of that made my skin crawl. "How much do you know about these entities?" I asked finally. He tapped a finger lightly against the desk. "Very little, in truth. What we've observed suggests they are not native to our dimension or to our understanding of it. They are opportunists, parasites in a way. They manifest in forms we recognize, forms we desire. And they do so for a single reason: entry." "Entry into what?" I asked. "The building?" He gave a tight smile. "Into us, Miss Zhao." That silenced me. He continued. "They learn fast. They adapt even faster. For them, a memory is a doorway. A regret is a loose thread. They pull, and if you don't follow protocol, everything unravels." I thought of the jade pendant around my neck, the chipped corner, the perfect recollection of a moment I hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. But how could they know so much? Those memories were never recorded, never written down. "Precisely," he said. "Whatever these entities are, they don't access data. They access you, thoughts, feelings, patterns of grief. That's why we screen our night receptionists so thoroughly. It's not about skills. It's about emotional thresholds. The more fractured a person's inner life, the more likely they are to be targeted." I swallowed, feeling suddenly exposed. My mother's medical bills, my dropped-out nursing program, the dreams I'd left behind just to stay afloat. So I was hired because I'm vulnerable. You were hired because you're disciplined despite being vulnerable, he corrected. A rare combination. We've found that desperation can foster compliance. It makes people follow rules when logic alone won't suffice. The bluntness of that statement knocked the wind out of me. I felt like a lab rat being complimented for running the maze fast enough to avoid the electric floor. He stood and moved to a nearby cabinet, unlocking it with a key he kept in his coat pocket. From inside, he retrieved a small vial of clear liquid and a file folder. He placed both on the desk. "This is for you," he said. "An emergency counteragent, should the entity attempt further neurological contact. And these," he tapped the folder, "are expanded versions of the protocols. You'll follow them exactly down to the punctuation." I didn't open either. I simply stared at him. "How many others have taken this job?" 17, he said without pause. "You are number 18. And how many made it to the end of their first month?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fifth night began with a storm. Rain fell in thick, slanted sheets, battering the lobby's glass doors and drowning out even the low hum of the building's ventilation. Lightning spiderwebbed across the clouds above the research facility. As I settled into my shift, the binder open in front of me, salt jar within arm's reach. Every muscle in my body was tense, bracing for whatever fresh terror the night might deliver. After the phone call and Roke's matter-of-fact revelations, I had stopped pretending this job was anything close to normal. By 1 a.m., I'd completed my checklist and poured a fresh circle of salt around the base of my chair. I wasn't taking any chances. The rules weren't just protocol, they were gospel now. The lobby was bathed in sterile light. The reflection of my monitors mirrored faintly against the doors. It was the kind of quiet that felt oppressive, like the building was holding its breath. Then came the knock, a single sharp rap on the glass that sliced through the silence like a scalpel. I jerked upright, heart in my throat, and turned to face the entrance. A woman stood just outside, soaked from head to toe, her lab coat clinging to her frame. Water dripped steadily from her sleeves, forming a growing puddle around her feet. Her blonde hair was plastered to her scalp, and her glasses were fogged. But even through the distortion of the rain-streaked glass, I recognized her. Dr. Amy, Laurie. Senior researcher in the biology division. I had seen her photo during my orientation. The digital employee directory Roke had shown me listed her under Level 4 clearance. The name on the ID badge she now held up to the glass matched perfectly. So did the picture. It was her, or at least it looked like her. She knocked again, more urgently this time, and cupped her hands around her eyes to peer inside. When she spotted me at the desk, her face lit up with unmistakable relief. She mouthed the word please and gestured toward the door lock, miming a key turning. I stood but didn't approach. Instead, I activated the intercom panel next to my desk. "I'm sorry," I said, voice shaking slightly, "but I can't open the doors between midnight and 6. It's against protocol." Her expression twisted in disbelief, then frustration. She pressed the button on the external intercom. "Mira, right? I'm Dr. Laurie. I just stepped out to get something from my car. My keycard's demagnetized. Look, it won't scan. I'm soaked. Please, I need to get back to Lab 3. I have time-sensitive cultures." I shook my head even as doubt crept in. The handbook had been explicit. Do not open the front entrance doors for any individual between midnight and 6 a.m., regardless of identification. I repeated the words in my head like a chant. "I'll call Mr. Roke," I said. "He can verify your status." "There's no time," she snapped, her voice cracking through the speakers. "If I don't get back to that lab, weeks of research are ruined. Months maybe. Use your common sense." But common sense wasn't what got people through the night here. I looked closer at her, narrowing my eyes. Something in her posture didn't match the desperation in her tone. Her shoulders were too still. her jaw too relaxed for someone allegedly, freezing and frantic, and then it happened, just for a second. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the lobby in a flickering strobe. For a moment, her shadow on the wet concrete behind her didn't match. It was too long, too thin, too sharp. My breath caught in my throat as the lightning faded, and the distorted shadow vanished along with it. I blinked hard, unsure if my mind was playing tricks or if the storm had just warped the E shape on the concrete. But the unease I felt was no illusion. Every instinct in me screamed that something wasn't right. Dr. Amy Laurie was still standing outside, her expression caught somewhere between anger and pleading. Rain streamed down, her face, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't even blink. Her eyes, foggy before, seemed clearer now, too clear. She pressed her badge against the glass again. "Mira," she said into the intercom, her voice suddenly calm. "I need to come in. Open the door, that's all. Just open the door." The calmness was wrong. Not a tired kind of surrender, but a detached stillness, like she was reading from a script she didn't understand. Her body wasn't shivering anymore either, despite being drenched from head to toe. She stood completely still, her arms limp at her sides, her soaked lab coat dripping onto the stone steps. "I've already contacted Mr. Roque," I lied, stalling. "He's on his way." She tilted her head slightly, like a dog hearing an unfamiliar sound. Then, with a slow smile, she said, "You should let me in, Mira Zhao. It would be better for everyone." My heart sank. She hadn't used my full name until that moment. I hadn't introduced myself through the intercom, only the people inside. The facility or something else could have known it. The salt circle around my desk suddenly felt insufficient. She stepped forward, her face nearly pressed to the glass. Her lips stopped moving, but I could still hear her voice whispering softly through the intercom. "Don't you want to be helpful? You don't want to be alone, do you?" Then I saw it. Her pupils began to dilate. Slowly at first, then rapidly, until her entire eyes turned completely black, voids without whites like holes punched through her face. The kind of eyes that didn't reflect light, but absorbed it, swallowing every flicker of the storm outside. My skin crawled. I reached under the desk and pressed the blue button. The phone rang once before Roque answered. His voice was as calm and precise as ever. "What protocol violation are you reporting?" "There's someone outside," I whispered. "She says, she's Dr. Law, but her eyes, something's wrong with her eyes." "Do not open the doors," he said instantly. "Go to the basement archive room. Lock yourself inside. I'm on my way." The line went dead. I looked up one more time at the woman, no, the thing outside the glass. She stood perfectly still, her face passive, those bottomless eyes fixed directly on me. Rain continued to sheet down her face, but she didn't react. Didn't blink, just watched. I stood from my chair, never taking my eyes off her. As I backed away from the desk, she didn't move. She didn't pound or shout or try to force entry. She only watched, head tilted slightly, as if memorizing my every feature. I turned and walked quickly toward the hallway, badge in hand, heading for the stairwell that led to the basement. Behind me, I thought I heard the intercom crackle back to life with a faint, dry whisper. "Run, little anchor." The stairwell lights flickered as I descended. Once, twice. I counted under my breath, praying it didn't happen a third time. It didn't, but I knew that if I'd stayed 1 second longer in that lobby, if I'd faltered, if I'd believed what I saw instead of what I felt, I wouldn't be here to tell this story, because that wasn't Dr. Amy Law. And whatever it was, it hadn't come to ask for help. It had come to be let in. The basement stairwell was colder than I remembered, colder than it had any right to be. Each step echoed into the silence below, the slap of my soles against the concrete sounding like gunshots in a cathedral. My badge trembled in my hand as I reached the access point for the archive room, and for a moment I fumbled with the reader, praying the keycard still worked. The soft beep and click of the lock disengaging might have been the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The hallway beyond was dimly lit by emergency bulbs, casting everything in a sickly amber hue. The deeper I went, the more the silence thickened. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of something in the silence, something waiting, watching. The air was heavy with it, dense and unmoving, like I was walking through the bottom of a drained pool. I reached the archive room at the far end of the corridor. It was marked by a metal door with a reinforced lock, identical to the one Mr. Roke had shown me on my first night. I struggled with the key, hands slick with sweat, until it finally gave. The door creaked open just enough for me to slip inside. Total darkness. I groped along the wall until I found the switch. A single yellowed bulb buzzed to life, revealing rows of shelves stacked with office supplies, old equipment, and unmarked boxes. The room smelled of dust and disinfectant, with a faint undertone of copper, faint enough that I told myself it wasn't blood. I closed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt. The metallic thunk felt like a seal against whatever had been outside. I pressed my back against the door and slid to the floor, heart thudding in my throat. I was safe. I should have felt safe. But then came the voice, soft, muffled, distant. Mira. Mira, why are you hiding? My blood turned to ice. It wasn't Roke. It wasn't anyone I'd met at the Institute. It was my grandmother's voice. Again. Let me in, little plum, she said, her tone coaxing, sorrowful. I'm just outside. I followed you. I missed you so much. I clenched my jaw and stayed silent, crawling backward until my back hit a stack of storage boxes. The voice came again, closer this time, and I realized it wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming through the door. You've grown so strong, she whispered, but you don't have to be strong for me. Open the door, Xiaomei. I want to see your face. I covered my ears with my hands. The voice didn't stop. It only grew louder. You're making a mistake. I brought something for you, a gift. You used to love my gifts. A sound like fingernails scraped slowly across the metal door, deliberate and patient. Then the scratching stopped, and the voice changed. No longer gentle, no longer familiar. You will let me in eventually, it hissed, guttural and warped. They all do. A heavy thud slammed into the door, rattling the frame. I jolted, my breath caught in my throat. Another thud followed, then another. It kept going, rhythmic and unrelenting. Between the blows I could hear other voices joining, and some I recognized, some I didn't. My mother, my childhood friend, a teacher, a stranger. All voices from my past, from memories long buried, all of them asking me to open the door. Pressed my back harder against the wall and clutched the salt jar in my lap. I wasn't going to open anything. Not for anyone, not anymore. The pounding on the door became erratic, so violent it shook the filing cabinets and sent a box of loose paper clips cascading across the floor in a metallic drizzle. I stayed crouched in the corner, knees pulled tight to my chest, breath ragged. The salt jar was still gripped in my hands like a lifeline, though I knew if that thing outside got in, no circle would matter, no rule would hold. This wasn't about protocol anymore. This was about endurance. Mira, the voice rasped again, low and wet, sliding under the crack of the door like fog. You can't hide from me forever. Then it was silent, utterly bone-deep silent. No footsteps retreating, no final threat, just the kind of stillness that made every cell in my body scream not to move. I stared at the door, waiting for the next impact, but none came, and that was worse. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The only sound was the ticking of my own heartbeat and the soft creak of the building shifting around me. I dared to stand, legs trembling. I didn't approach the door, but I did inch closer, listening for any sign of life or unlife on the other side. Then I heard something new. A click. Not a lock. Not the door. It was a key turning in the lock. My stomach dropped. I scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a stack of toner cartridges. Whoever or whatever was out there had a key. That wasn't in the rules. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Mira, the voice called again, quieter now, coaxing once more. It's me, Halden Roke. I came as soon as I got your alert. Let me in. No, it wasn't him. I knew that immediately. Roke's voice didn't tremble. This one did. He didn't call me by my first name so casually. He never knocked. And yet this impersonator had was learning, how to mimic even his cadence, his inflection, the better to confuse, to persuade, the better to be let in. I said nothing. The handle jiggled once, twice, then a slow scrape. Metal against metal, not trying to force entry, but trying to make sure I heard it. You were doing so well, the voice sighed. So obedient, but I see now, maybe you're not compatible after all. A chill raced up my spine. That word, compatible, it had been used in my onboarding documents. I remembered Roke's clipped tone when he first told me why I'd been hired. My desperation had made me compliant. My grief had made me ideal. Was this part of it? Some kind of test? Or had I already failed? Another sound broke the tension. The faintest mechanical beep, like a door badge scanning from a distance. A moment later, the pounding footsteps of boots against concrete echoed from the far hallway. Real footsteps. Rapid, human, then Roke's voice, the real one, sharp and commanding. Stand clear of the door, Miss Zhao. I backed up immediately, retreating to the farthest corner of the room. A pulse of bright white light flooded in through the thin frame around the door, accompanied by a metallic shriek, high-pitched and unnatural. Then silence returned, followed by a rapid sequence of knocks. Miss Zhao, it's Roke, confirm identity verbally. Halden Roke, I said, voice shaky. Director of the Vancroft Institute. You don't blink. You straighten your cuffs when you're annoyed. The door opened a heartbeat later. He stood there, perfectly pressed suit, flanked by two unfamiliar security officers in matte black gear. A strange-looking device hummed in his hand, still glowing faintly. It's neutralized, he said, but it won't be the last. I stepped into the hallway, legs unsteady. I hadn't let the thing in, but I had heard it, felt it, and almost believed it. And something told me that was enough for it to remember me. I returned to my desk that night under the sharp gaze of newly installed security cameras, sleek black domes that now stared directly at me instead of at the building's entrances. They were supposed to make me feel safer. Instead, I felt like a subject under observation, like something fragile and potentially volatile being monitored for cracks. The monitors hummed quietly. My desk lamp cast a sterile glow across the binder, the salt container, and the list of new protocol addendums I had yet to memorize. I hadn't slept properly in days. Ever since the encounter in the basement, I'd begun to question every sound, every flicker, every silence that stretched too long. I'd followed the rules, yes, but it was becoming clear that the rules weren't always enough. At 3:12 a.m., just as I was logging atmospheric readings into the system, a flicker of movement caught the edge of my vision. I turned, just slightly, to glance at the monitors. Camera 4, positioned behind the reception desk, was active. What I saw made the breath catch in my throat. It was me, sitting at my desk. But it wasn't me. The Mira Zhao on the screen wasn't doing what I was doing. Her posture was off, too rigid, too still. She wasn't typing. She wasn't writing. She was just sitting, staring forward. Slowly, unnaturally, she tilted her head as if hearing something distant. Then, with jarring, almost mechanical movement, she stood. On the screen, I watched myself rise from the chair and walk to the front doors. But in reality, I was still sitting, still watching. The other me pressed a hand to the scanner. The door slid open effortlessly. The double of me. Same. Clothes, same badge, same hair pulled into a messy bun, walked out into the night. I was frozen. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Then the phone rang. The sound jolted me so badly I knocked my knee into the underside of the desk. I reached for the receiver with trembling fingers. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Miss Zhao," came Roke's clipped, precise. "Shreyas, why have you left your post?" I haven't," I said. "I'm still here. I haven't moved." A pause. Longer than usual. "Our systems logged an exit through the front doors from your access card 3 minutes ago. The motion sensors detected someone matching your profile in the parking lot." I swallowed, heart pounding. "I just saw it on camera 4. It looked like me. It wasn't me. I'm still at my desk." Another pause. Then Roke's tone turned sharp. "Camera 4, you looked directly at it?" I didn't answer. That was enough of an answer. There was a click on the line. "Dr. Knox has just triggered a panic alert in Lab 7B. Go check on him immediately." "What about the double, the thing that left the building?" "It's no longer inside. Dr. Knox may be in danger. Go, now." The line went dead. Hesitated only for a second. Then I grabbed my badge and headed down the east corridor, heart hammering. Whatever had taken my form was now loose out there. Worse, it had my access. But the part that truly terrified me wasn't that it looked like me. It was that I had watched it happen. Watched it walk away like it had every right to be me. And I hadn't stopped it. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't understand fast enough what I was seeing. Whatever was inside the Institute was no longer content to whisper from the shadows. Now it wanted to walk in my shoes. And the cameras, the very ones meant to help us monitor breaches, had become part of the breach itself. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel carved from silence, lit only by the cold blue glow of emergency strips embedded in the floor. My footsteps echoed, too loudly against the tiles, each one punctuated by the sound of my own breath, sharp, shallow, uneven. Roke's words still rang in my ears. "Dr. Knox may be in danger. Go. Now." It was the first time I'd heard urgency in his voice, the kind that cracked the mask he wore so tightly. I turned the last corner and found the door to Lab 7B slightly ajar. A red light above the frame blinked steadily, an active panic alert. I hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open with my shoulder. "Dr. Knox," I called, my voice wavering. The room beyond was dimly lit and choked with machinery. Monitors flickered with streams of code. Tablets and glass beakers cluttered the workbenches, but the room itself felt off, as if it had been recently vacated in a rush, or worse, abandoned mid-emergency. I took a few cautious steps inside. The air smelled like ozone and blood. The latter was faint, but present, a sharp, coppery tang that made my stomach twist. From behind one of the larger server racks, I heard something shift. "Dr. Knox," I repeated, edging around the equipment. That's when I saw him. He was crouched in the far corner, his back pressed against the wall, his face pale and drenched in sweat. His glasses were askew, and blood dripped from his nose and ears in slow rivulets, staining the collar of his lab coat. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed squarely on me. "No," he whispered, his voice raw and full of panic. "You're not real. I saw you die." I froze. "What?" I said, holding my hands up to show I meant no harm. "Dr. Knox, it's Mira Zhao. I came after you, triggered the alert. Roke sent me. You were here," he gasped, trembling. "You walked in already. You smiled at me, your face twisted, then you vanished, but the door never opened. You never left." My blood ran cold. Whatever had left through the front doors hadn't left completely. It had been here too, wearing my face, speaking with my voice, and now Dr. Knox was hemorrhaging because of it. "Dr. Knox, you're hurt," I said, stepping closer. "Let me help you, I have medical training." "Stay back," he screamed, flinching as though I were a threat. "You're one of them. You're another thing. I watched you shift. Your face wasn't yours." I didn't know what to say, how to convince him that I was the real one. Then he blinked rapidly and touched his temple, confused by the blood on his fingertips. "I feel strange," he whispered. He collapsed to the floor a moment later. I rushed forward, catching his head just before it hit the ground. His breathing was shallow and irregular. Blood now trickled from the corners of his mouth. "I need help in Lab 7B, I muttered to no one, realizing too late I'd left my phone at the desk. The room didn't have a landline, but a red emergency button was mounted on the wall. I slammed my palm against it. A piercing alarm filled the lab, echoing down the corridors like a siren's cry. "Hold on," I whispered, checking Dr. Knox's vitals. His pulse was weak. His skin was going clammy beneath my fingers. Then, as if surfacing for a moment of lucidity, he opened his eyes and stared into mine. "It's in the walls," he said softly. Then he went still. I didn't know if he meant the creature, the breach, or something even worse. But I knew this. I had arrived too late, and whatever was inside this building was no longer content with pretending to be us. It had started to kill us instead. The aftermath of Dr. Knox's death unfolded with a surreal kind of precision, like the script of an emergency drill everyone hoped they'd never have to use. Within minutes of the alarm, medical staff poured into Lab 7B, their faces grim, but focused. Security agents followed, armed, silent, their presence more oppressive than protective. I was ushered out of the room, past stretchers and sealed black equipment cases, into the corridor where Mr. Roke stood waiting like a marble statue come to life. He didn't speak until the lab door had sealed behind us. "Come with me," he said. I expected to be led back to my post or the briefing room. Instead, we turned down a seldom-used hallway, one I hadn't noticed before. It smelled different, older, like dust and ozone. At the end of the corridor, Roke swiped his card against a panel, then used a key from around his neck to open a reinforced door. Inside was a compact surveillance hub. Monitors lined the walls, some displaying live footage, others looping through archived feeds. Dr. Breck was already inside. I'd seen her name in staff directories but never spoken with her directly. She was a senior cognitive systems researcher, mid-40s with sharp cheekbones and silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight knot. Her lab coat was immaculate, but the look on her face was anything but composed. She turned sharply when we entered, her expression fraught. "She saw it," Roke said without preamble. Dr. Breck stepped forward. "Miss Zhao, what exactly did you witness before Dr. Knox collapsed?" I recounted everything, the movement on the monitor, the doppelganger leaving the building, the strange exchange in Lab 7B, and Dr. Knox's final words. I didn't leave anything out. When I was finished, the room felt 10 degrees colder. Dr. Breck pressed a trembling hand to her temple and muttered, "It's adapting faster than expected." "What is?" I asked. "The breach entity?" Her eyes flicked to Roke, who gave her a curt nod. She inhaled deeply, then said, "We've encountered behavior like this before, but never this soon. It mimics, not just appearance, but emotional. Memory, behavioral nuance, it learns you. It scans your thought patterns and applies them like code. So it's not just pretending to be me," I said slowly. "It's becoming me, in a way," she said, "but not fully. It can't maintain the illusion indefinitely. That's when the facade begins to fracture, when its true nature bleeds through. That's what Dr. Knox saw, and it overwhelmed. His brain's ability to process the dissonance. A perfect mirror with a single flaw can still shatter the mind. I swallowed hard. Then how do we fight it? Dr. Breck's expression darkened. You don't. Not directly. That's what makes you dangerous to it and to us. You're still an anchor, Mira. It's attached to you, drawn to your neural signature like a moth to flame. Why me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Roque finally spoke again. Because your signature is unusually stable across potentialities. You're a fixed point in variable systems. In other words, your mind is hard to corrupt but easy to detect. And that makes me bait, I said flatly. A long silence. Yes, Dr. Breck finally admitted. But also, the only person who might survive long enough to understand it. I looked between the two of them, realization settling like a stone in my gut. The rules weren't written to protect me. They were written to test me. And every night I stayed in this facility, the entity wasn't just watching, it was learning. From me. The surveillance room emptied slowly, one technician at a time, until only Mr. Roque, Dr. Breck, and I remained. Silence pooled in the corners of the chamber, broken only by the low hum of machines and the subtle flicker of looping footage on the monitors. Dr. Knox's last moments replayed again and again, frozen in digital fragments, his wide, terrified eyes, the blood blooming from his ears, the desperate gasp. It's in the walls, I couldn't look away. I need to know the truth, I said, my voice hollow. Not the protocols, not the sanitized briefing material. I want the full version. Why was I really brought here? Dr. Breck didn't answer immediately. She moved to the console and keyed in a new sequence. The looping footage shifted, now revealing scenes I hadn't seen before. Images of previous receptionists, young, determined, isolated. Their faces, like mine, carried the look of someone caught between survival and confusion. One by one, the recordings ended the same way. A final log, a frantic report, then static. They were like me, I whispered. Roque's voice came from behind me, low and deliberate. Each one selected for high compatibility, emotional pressure points, limited family support, financial desperation, high neural elasticity. So expendable. No, said Dr. Breck. Essential. You weren't brought here to die, Mira. You were brought here to last, to outlast it. She brought up one last file labeled Anchor 18, my name, my psychological profile. Notes on everything from the day I applied to the moment I took my first call. Words like resilience, persistent dissociative endurance, and low existential drift populated the notes like medical diagnoses. And at the bottom, one last sentence stood alone. Subject may be the key to interface inversion if sustained beyond 21 cycles. Interface inversion? I asked, staring at the phrase. What does that mean? Dr. Breck hesitated, then said quietly, the entity doesn't just copy, it inserts. It creates presence by hijacking belief. The more you think about it, the more real it becomes. But in rare cases, very rare, if the anchor can confront it with enough stability, the entity can be forced to collapse into itself. A kind of paradoxical purge. You want me to trap it, I said, stunned. You want me to bait it close enough and then force it to self-erase? No, Roque said flatly. We want you to survive it. And to do that, you must see it for what it truly is. Not your grandmother, not a scientist, not yourself, just a fracture in the wall of what we understand. My mind reeled, and then the monitors glitched, all of them at once. Each screen blinked, flickered, distorted, and then displayed the same image. Me, sitting at my desk, staring into the camera, with a grin too wide and eyes that were too still. But behind me, the lobby had changed. The walls bulged inward, reality distorting like heat waves bending asphalt. Shadows spilled where light should be. My double raised one hand, pointed directly at the camera, and mouthed a single word. Soon. Doctor. Greg stepped forward, frantically typing commands to sever the feed, but the image didn't vanish. It simply remained, frozen like a challenge. It's here, I said. It never left. Roke turned to me, his expression no longer cold, but grim. You'll go back out there tonight. Same shift, same desk. And if I don't? Asked, already knowing the answer. Then someone else will, someone less prepared. I stared at the monitors, at my own impossible face, and understood what they'd been preparing me for all along. The rules weren't just a test. They were the last lines of defense. And tonight I would either rewrite the end of this story or become the next recording they looped in this room. I returned to the Vancroft Institute the next night, under a sky smeared with grey clouds, the air heavy with the threat of another storm. The building loomed in the dark like a tomb, its glass and steel facade reflecting nothing. There were more guards at the entrance this time, 2 men in tactical gear who didn't say a word as I approached. One held out a handheld device that resembled a thermometer, but sleeker, smoother. A single green light blinked on its surface. Stand still, the guard said. I obeyed, jaw clenched. He raised the device to my forehead and pressed the trigger. A faint vibration passed through my skin, like a whisper just beneath the surface. The device beeped softly, then displayed a simple word in pale blue letters on its screen. Satisfactory. Proceed, he said, stepping aside. Inside the lobby, the lights were dimmer than usual. Roke was already waiting at my desk, his suit immaculate as always. But tonight there was a tension around his eyes, a strain he couldn't quite disguise. Before we proceed, he said, withdrawing a new device from his coat pocket, we'll need a full resonance verification. He handed it to me. Another scanner, slightly larger than the one at the door. Place it beneath your tongue. I hesitated. You think I might not be me? We're past thinking, he replied. We're confirming. I took the device and followed the instructions. It vibrated for a few seconds before emitting a brief tone and lighting up green. Roke took it back, examined the readout and nodded. You are still yourself, he said quietly, but something in his tone unnerved me, like he'd expected a different outcome, or maybe feared one. What if it said I wasn't? I asked. Then you wouldn't be standing here having this conversation. The words settled between us like a lead weight. He stepped aside to reveal the latest addition to my workspace, another thick folder labeled Anchor 18, High Threshold Variant. It was sealed with a red band and bore a warning at the top. 4. Subject access only. These are the updated protocols, he said. You'll notice several have changed based on your recent interactions. Others have been removed. We're entering a volatile phase. Patterns have begun to accelerate. Volatile? I echoed. The entity isn't just learning from you anymore, he said. It's building something. Mimicry wasn't the end goal. It was the blueprint. We believe it's constructing a stable identity, a permanent insertion into this dimension, using you as its template. I felt something cold slide through my veins. So if it finishes, it becomes me. Not just you, Roke said. Her version of you that can walk freely, that no scan will ever detect. A parasite with perfect camouflage. My legs felt weak. I sat slowly, the weight of the folder pressing into my lap like a warning. If this is all true, I whispered, how do I know I am me? What if I'm already compromised and just don't remember? Roke's eyes didn't leave mine. That's what the scans are for. For now, you register as intact. But identity, Miss Zhao, is a fragile construct. One shift in memory, one fractured belief, that's all it takes. I opened the folder. Inside were revised instructions, color-coded and printed on thick paper. New entries included phrases like temporal eco-events, identity loop disruption, and most chilling of all, If subject encounters self-immediate protocol breach, emergency lockdown mandatory. I looked up. You think I'm going to see it again? The other me. We don't think, Roke said. We know, he tapped. The desk once, then turned to leave. You begin in 5 minutes. Do not break the circle. Do not answer the phone unless instructed. And above all, he paused at the door. Do not forget who you are. I sat alone at the reception desk, the soft hum of machines and fluorescent lights settling around me, like a synthetic lullaby. The lobby was quiet, too quiet, the kind of sterile stillness that made every breath feel intrusive. The salt circle around my station was perfectly intact, checked twice, then again for good measure. I'd restocked my emergency kit, flashlight, extra batteries, a copy of the updated protocols, and 2 backup salt jars. Even the handbook sat open beside me, pages dog-eared and ink-marked like scripture. The new salary, $50 an hour. The new reality? I was the most expensive piece of bait this building had ever deployed. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Roke had made it clear. My presence was not incidental. I wasn't just someone desperate for work. I was a stabilizing force in a place designed to destabilize, a fixed point to attract anomalies like a flame draws moths. But unlike moths, these things didn't die when they touched the fire. They thrived in it. The hours crept by. Midnight, 1, 2. Each tick of the analog wall clock thudded in my ears. I logged readings from each wing. I did walkthroughs. I even tried to read the same chapter of my novel 3 times and couldn't remember a word of it. At 2:37 a.m., the crying began. Faint at first, just a distant, reedy wail, like an infant somewhere in the vents. The sound prickled every nerve in my body. I froze, every instinct screaming to act, to go, to find it. But I knew better now. Page 11 of the updated protocol packet. If infant crying is heard between midnight and 5 a.m., do not investigate. Create a salt perimeter and remain within its boundaries until dawn or until cleared by authorized personnel. Under no circumstances should you attempt to locate the source. I reached for the jar and reinforced the circle. The crying grew louder, closer, then duplicated. First from the east wing, then from above, then from behind me. Impossible directions at impossible distances. It wasn't just crying anymore. It was layered. A sound designed to bypass logic and aim directly for emotion, pulling at buried reflexes. I clamped my hands over my ears and forced myself to breathe. You're not a rescuer, I told myself. You're not a savior. You're the lure, the lighthouse, the shield. But shields break. I looked at the clock again. 2:51 a.m. I still had hours left. And then it began speaking. Not the crying, the thing. Its voice was infantile at first, garbled, syllables with no structure, but then it learned, it adapted. The words gained clarity. Mira, I snapped my head up. Mira, help me, it said in a child's voice, high-pitched and trembling. It's cold. I backed further into the chair, watching the air vent above the water cooler tremble. I'm scared, it said. You're supposed to help. That's why you're here, right? That's what good people do. The temperature dropped. I could see my own breath. $50 an hour, the voice whispered. That's the price of your silence, the price of staying still. But what if something real needs you? Would you still just sit? I gritted my teeth and stared at the handbook. The inked words felt like a tether. My anchor. Salt keeps them out, I whispered. Salt keeps me in. Silence fell again. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, laughter. Gurgling, broken, but unmistakably mocking. They knew. They all knew. I wasn't here because I was strong. I was here because I was willing, And for $50 an hour, I was exactly what they needed. Obedient, isolated, and just broken enough to stay. The crying began again at exactly 3:06 a.m., as if triggered by some internal alarm I couldn't see or understand. It started low, distant, like a single wail bouncing through industrial pipes. But within 30 seconds, it multiplied. The sound, layered overlapping into a cacophony of pleading cries, all variations of the same voice. A baby, several babies. Maybe not babies at all, the worst part? It sounded real. It didn't echo with the reverb of an intercom or the distortion of audio playback. It had depth, warmth, the subtle organic imperfections that came only from something alive and vulnerable. My gut twisted. Every instinct I had screamed to move, to do something. There's a part of the human brain that can't ignore that sound. Evolution has hardwired us to respond to it. Crying infants trigger alarm, empathy, fear, protection, and the things inside this building knew that. I snapped open the salt jar and poured a thick, jagged ring around my entire workstation, reinforcing the one I'd created earlier. My fingers trembled as I worked, knuckles white with tension. Had read this section of the protocol too many times to forget what it meant. Do not investigate. Do not cross the threshold. Do not follow the sound. By 3:08 a.m., the crying came from everywhere. Vents, hallways, even the phone, which lit up briefly without ringing. The light blinked in time with the cries. I turned it face down. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. Twice. I tried to distract myself, counting ceiling tiles, naming bones in the human body, reciting the periodic table under my breath, but the crying wouldn't let up. It changed rhythm. It grew in urgency. At times it sounded like it was right outside the lobby doors. Other times it echoed from the stairwell behind me. A few moments later, it moved to the ductwork above my head, and then came the voice, not the baby's mine. A perfect imitation of my own voice whispered, "Mira." I froze. The voice was dry, strained, like it had spoken too many times through a throat that was never meant to carry sound. It came again, clearer this time. "Mira, it's out." A soft scratching sound followed, metal grating against metal. The ceiling vent above the water cooler shifted, the screws gently vibrating in their sockets. My breath caught. One of them was trying to come through. I hadn't moved. I hadn't triggered anything, and yet something had found me. I didn't look up. I didn't move. A sharp ping as one of the screws dropped to the floor, then another. A small hand appeared next, flesh pale and rubbery, with too many knuckles and fingers that bent at strange, jointless angles. It gripped the edge of the vent and pulled. A head followed, roughly infant-shaped but wrong. The skin was translucent, veined with pulsing blue. Its eyes were too large, black voids like polished obsidian. It had no hair, no eyebrows. Just smooth, soft skin stretched over something far too angular to be human. Then its mouth opened. The crying resumed, but now I could see where it was coming from. Its jaw unhinged, opening wider than its skull should allow, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth arranged in concentric rings, like a lamprey's maw. The sound it emitted wasn't a baby's cry anymore. It was a mimicry, a trick, the audio equivalent of a mask. The creature dropped from the vent and landed within human grace just outside the salt ring. Two others followed moments later, crawling. From different ducts like spiders in newborn skin, they circled me, testing the boundary. I didn't move, I didn't blink. The handbook had been clear. Do not respond. Do not engage. Do not look directly into their eyes, but they were looking into mine and smiling. They looked like babies only from a distance, maybe in shape, in size, in the way their bodies crawled awkwardly on all fours. But the closer they moved, the clearer the deception became. These weren't infants. They were caricatures of innocence stitched together from human instinct and nightmare anatomy. Their faces stretched too wide when they smiled, cheeks trembling with something that mimicked joy, but radiated only malice. Their skin had the delicate pallor of newborns, but upon closer inspection, it rippled with movement, like something else was shifting just beneath the surface, waiting to burst free. 3 of them encircled me now, crawling slowly around the salt ring. One paused to tilt its bulbous head, as if inspecting the barrier with mild curiosity. Its eyes, void black and completely still, locked with mine for a moment. I felt something cold move behind my eyeballs, like an unseen pressure, trying to reach into my thoughts and pull something out. The creature leaned closer. Then it extended a single, too long finger toward the line of salt. The moment its skin brushed the edge, a soft crackle sizzled through the air, like static electricity snapping off a sweater, and the thing jerked back with a shriek that twisted the air. Not the cry of an infant this time. No, it was the voice of something far older and infinitely crueler, forced into a form it did not understand and could not maintain. The other 2 snarled in response, circling faster now. One of them climbed onto the reception counter and peered at me from above, mouth gaping wide in a silent scream. Its gums were ridged, raw, and its tongue moved in ways that defied biology. Too many folds, too many joints, like a parasite tasting. The air for weakness. I stayed seated within the circle, unmoving, gripping the open handbook like a life raft. The rules were all I had. The only thread between me and the abyss. One of them began to mimic again. "Mira," it cooed in my mother's voice. My hands tightened. Another followed. "Help me, baby. It's okay. Mommy's here." My stomach lurched. I pressed my palms against my ears and stared at the handbook instead. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, flickering now, casting intermittent shadows that danced with the creature's twitching forms. Every time the light came back on, they were closer. Then the smallest one found the floor. Somewhere in my initial panic, I must have scuffed the salt line with my foot. Just a smudge, barely a finger's width. But it was enough. The thing reached, one hand through the gap. The tips of its claws scraped the edge of my shoe. I screamed and grabbed the salt jar, pouring a thick layer over the breach. The creature recoiled, hissing, retreating back across the boundary with surprising speed. Its skin shimmered, shifting hue like oil on water, distorting as though the act of being repelled had damaged its disguise. All 3 paused. They stared at me in unison. Then they began to laugh. Not a baby's giggle, not even close. It was a wet, clicking sound that came from deep within their throats. Mockery made audible. They knew they had almost gotten in. They had found the gap. They would find more if I faltered, but I wouldn't, because I finally understood. These weren't creatures sent to kill me. Not at first. They were sent to convert me, to weaken me, piece by piece, instinct by instinct, memory by memory, until I stepped out of the circle willingly and handed them the keys. They weren't monsters with baby faces. They were masks for the real thing beneath the skin, and I had just seen them smile. The rules were clear. The handbook repeated it like gospel. Do not break the salt line, do not leave the perimeter, do not act unless instructed. But rules are for people with the luxury of distance, people who haven't watched a nightmare, mimic their mother's voice, or press too many fingered hands against the edge of their safety. And in that moment, after hours of mental erosion and calculated terror, I did the one thing I promised myself I wouldn't. I broke protocol. It wasn't an act of bravery. It wasn't even a mistake. It was a reflex, born from the sudden silence that followed the creature's retreat. They'd vanished into the vents without a sound, but not before one of them whispered in perfect imitation of Dr. Breck, Lab 3. She's waiting. My rational brain screamed at me to ignore it, but some small, deeply wired part of me, the part that still believed in decency, in duty, in human connection, flinched. And in that flinch, I moved. I stepped outside the circle. Just 1 foot. Just to reset the salt line again, I told myself. But the moment I did, the lobby shifted. It wasn't a physical change. The lights didn't flicker. The walls didn't collapse. No alarms blared. It was subtler than that. The air itself thickened like I'd stepped into a room filled with invisible fog. Every sound was muffled. My heartbeat slowed in my ears. And somewhere deep inside me, a pressure bloomed behind my eyes. Like something old and patient had just noticed me stepping out of bounds. Still, I pressed forward. The salt container remained clutched in my hand as I crossed the lobby toward the hallway that led to Lab 3. My badge shook in my grip. Every step felt wrong. The corridor ahead stretched longer than I remembered, and the walls curved slightly inward, like a tunnel bending toward collapse. The floor was damp, not wet, damp as if the air had been sweating. As I passed the door, to Lab 1, the lights above me dimmed just enough for a shadow to shift at the corner of my vision. I turned. No one, except the cameras were moving. Slowly, each one tracked my motion with a near-organic fluidity, like eyes adjusting their focus. One blinked red, then green, then red again. I kept walking. This is what it wants, I thought. You're not following a lead. You're following a leash. Still, I reached Lab 3. The door stood slightly ajar. Inside was darkness, deeper than it should have been, with the emergency bulbs still functioning elsewhere in the building. I placed one hand on the doorframe, the other gripping the salt jar so tightly my knuckles cracked. "Dr. Breck?" I called out. No answer, but something moved inside. A ripple of shadow detached from the far wall and took shape. Not fully, just an outline, just enough. It mimicked her posture, her voice. "Come inside, Mira, I'm here." It was too perfect, too soon, too easy. I backed away. The thing stopped mimicking and let out a sound like air rushing through shattered glass. I turned and ran, back down the corridor, back past the cameras that blinked erratically now, back to the lobby that no longer felt like a place, but a boundary between two realities. I crossed the salt circle in reverse, heart pounding, breath ragged. My desk chair waited, silent, familiar. I sat down, shaking, trembling, angry. I had broken protocol, but I had learned something in return. It didn't just want to imitate. It wanted permission, an invitation, a moment of weakness. And I had given it. That moment. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. I didn't even leave the institute. Instead, I waited for the sun to rise, its pale light filtering in through the lobby windows like a diluted blessing. The horrors of the night seemed to recede with the morning haze, but I knew better. Whatever lurked within these walls, whatever watched from behind the eyes of imitations, it didn't vanish with dawn. It only waited. At 8:01 a.m., the day, receptionist Amanda, I think, arrived surprised to find me still there. I mumbled something about night logs and additional documentation, and she nodded politely, clearly eager to avoid the strange girl with the 1,000-yard stare. As soon as she took her seat, I made my way to the access elevator behind the east stairwell, punching in the override code Roke had shown me 2 weeks ago under the guise of Emergency Protocol Access. I rode down to sub-level 2. The biometric scanner blinked green at my fingerprint. I was still me, at least as far as the system could tell. The archive room wasn't large, but it was dense. Rows of filing cabinets, locked storage drives, and a few ancient terminals humming quietly like old sentinels. I knew what I was looking for. I had seen it before. Anchor subjects, observational files. It didn't take long to find. The file wasn't just about me. It was about everyone like me. The ones who came before. The ones who didn't leave. There were 17 in total. Each entry was catalogued with chilling precision. Full psychological workups, trauma profiles, stress thresholds, and social isolation indexes. Every subject had a code name, a background, and a score. Compatibility percentages ranging from the low 60s to the high 90s. Mine, I noticed with no satisfaction, sat at the top. Mira Zhao, 97%. Attached to each entry was a section titled Protocol Deviation Risk. Most were flagged red. Below those entries were end logs. Some were brief. Subject failed to maintain. Salt perimeter. Terminated during entity manifestation event. Others were ambiguous. Subject responded to temporal echo. Status, unrecovered, and one simply read, Subject merged. I felt sick. I knew the stories weren't just cautionary tales. They were records. Memories of the Institute's failures retold in the handbook as rules. Each protocol existed because someone else had broken it first and paid for it. Then I found the harvesting folder. Inside was a document titled Essence Stabilization Through Anchor Interface. It described in dry clinical language how emotional trauma, specifically unresolved grief, guilt, or dependency, created neurological roots strong enough to ground an entity inside this dimension. Anchor subjects were chosen not despite their damage, but because of it. I wasn't here to fight the breach. I was the breach's handle, a tether, a magnet, a sacrificial constant wrapped in a human shell. The files outlined procedures for containment, escalation, and, if necessary, neutralization. There were pages detailing how to dismantle a subject's mental defenses, how to feed the connection without severing stability, how to test the limits of their identity while preventing collapse. The Institute didn't just study the breach. They curated it. They welcomed it like an invasive guest, assigning us anchors as both the key and the bait. I kept reading. At the bottom of the last document was a list of known entity behavior patterns. Among them, mirror mimicry, grief echoes, temporal displacement, and the final one, underlined and dated only 4 days prior. Cognitive replacement pending confirmation. Subject MZ'd my initials. I stared at those 2 letters until the page blurred. They weren't just watching me, they were measuring how long I'd last. How long before the version of me that wore my face would be more real to them than the one reading this file. I closed the folder slowly, set it back in the drawer and locked it. I wasn't an employee. I was an experiment. But the difference now, I knew it. The elevator ride back to the ground floor was slow. Each floor ticked off with a hollow mechanical chime that echoed like a countdown. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored interior wall. Same face, same tired eyes. But after what I had read in the archive, I didn't trust it. I couldn't help but search for flaws in my own expression. Was that twitch in my left eyelid just exhaustion, or was something off? When I stepped out into the lobby, daylight had fully taken over, spilling through the tall windows in long golden slants. Amanda waved goodbye as she left her shift, but her smile faltered for a second, like she was looking at someone almost familiar but not quite. I watched her go, a ripple of unease crawling under my skin. By nightfall, the building was once again mine. The silence returned like a familiar predator. I performed my walkthroughs with mechanical detachment, logging everything as I always did, reinforcing the salt line 3 times over. But something was different tonight. The air felt wrong, like the pressure had shifted. At 2:11 a.m., the cameras glitched. I'd been watching the monitor bank with my peripheral vision, just like the handbook ordered. When every single screen, spasmed with static, not a flicker, a synchronized distortion, like something had passed through the entire network all at once. I broke protocol. I looked directly. It wasn't out of curiosity. It was instinct. And I paid the price. Camera 4 lit up first. The view was angled behind the reception desk, showing me or someone seated where I now sat. Except it wasn't me, not entirely. The figure twitched. It raised its head and smiled, and the smile glitched. That was the only word for it. One moment it looked like a grin, then it fractured, stretched, dissolved into a series of flickering expressions that passed too quickly to track. Grief, rage, confusion, ecstasy. Each one lasted less than a frame, like a subliminal flash of something monstrous wearing a human interface. On camera 2, the same glitch. Me again, this time pacing in a hallway I hadn't visited in days. The figure jerked with every step, moving like film played at the wrong speed. Its limbs were too fluid, then suddenly too stiff, like the system couldn't render it properly. Then it looked into the lens, and I swear I saw it mouth. Almost. I backed away from the monitors. Camera 5 switched on. This one showed the break room. A fourth version of me stood there. She poured coffee, spilled some, laughed. At first glance it looked completely normal, until I noticed her fingers. Too many joints. They bent as she moved, bending backward with casual grace, as if she didn't notice or didn't care. Then her face flickered again. For a split second, her skin went transparent, revealing an angular skull beneath, faceted like crystal glinting in the machine light. Then the face reformed. Another glitch. They were all breaking. Whatever it was trying to simulate me from the inside out. But it was struggling now, slipping. The mimicry had become unstable. It was too close, and the system, the building, the cameras, the rules, was breaking under the weight of what it had invited in. One by one, the monitors shut off, leaving only static. I stood in the darkness of the reception desk, heart pounding, skin clammy. I no longer feared the creatures crawling through the vents. I feared the version of me that was learning how to replace me, with each glitch, each reflection, each copied breath. I didn't know how long I had left before the system decided I wasn't the original anymore, but I knew one thing for certain: the face on those cameras, it was still smiling. And next time it might not glitch at all. After the glitching faces disappeared from the monitors, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. Every second stretched thin, brittle, like glass about to shatter. I sat motionless at my desk, staring into the black screen of camera 4, even though I knew I shouldn't. My own face no longer felt like mine. The way it moved, the way it smiled. Something had crawled into the shape of me and was wearing it like a skin. And worst of all, I didn't know who was watching who anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. I was just a receptionist. I had read too much, seen too much. Anchor subjects are not passive participants, the secret files had said. They are required for sustained dimensional alignment and neural essence collection. And now, as the monitors flickered back to life one by one, normal again, as if nothing had happened, I realized the truth had only just begun to reveal itself. That night I returned to the archive. Not the surveillance floor or the protocol room. I went deeper. Sub-level 3 wasn't on the official blueprints. I accessed it using a temporary admin keycard I had swiped from Roke's desk during one of his countless lectures. It felt reckless, stupid even, but I had to see it for myself. The hallway leading down to the level was colder than the rest of the Institute. The lights here weren't fluorescent. They pulsed faintly in organic shades of red and violet, like something breathing slowly in the walls. At the end of the corridor was a single steel door marked Harvesting Operations. Level 3 clearance required. The keycard worked. Inside, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath fogged, and there they were, the containment pods. Dozens of them, stretching along the walls like upright coffins, each glowing faintly with internal light. Inside each one, motionless human forms, some still, some twitching. None truly awake. Their heads were wired with small halo-like devices, and a thick silvery fluid pulsed through tubes running from the base of each pod into the wall. I approached the nearest one. It was a woman, young, pale, with dark hair. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Her lips moved slightly, forming words I couldn't hear. A screen beside the pod displayed her name. Tara N. Anchor Subject 14. Compatibility 91% a second line. Status Essence. Yield Active. Neurological. Integrity unstable. My knees nearly gave out. She was still alive, not dead, not missing, just drained. Essence extraction for dimensional stabilization, I remembered from the files. Emotional networks harvested through artificial trauma loops, sustained by temporal distortions. These people, these anchors, were being kept in stasis, their minds endlessly replaying their worst fears, their most painful memories, feeding something that used their pain as a conduit, a battery made of grief, and the one they'd chosen next, me, was walking toward the same fate. The rest of the room confirmed it. Diagrams of cognitive strain, looping trauma cycles, handwritten notes discussing neural decay thresholds and identity saturation, screens mapping out faces like mine across dozens of simulations, some laughing, some screaming, all locked in recursive breakdowns. In the far corner, a wall-sized monitor displayed an active scan of my own brain. Mira Zhao, Subject 18, Compatibility 97%, Yield Peak, Status Free Range. I stared at the final line, hands trembling. Free range. I wasn't in a pod because I didn't need to be. My fear, my confusion, my unraveling sense of self, they were already enough to feed the system while I walked freely. They didn't have to lock me in a machine. They had built the machine around me. Suddenly I understood why I'd been given the highest pay, why I had been allowed to break protocol without punishment, why they wanted me in that seat every night. Not because I was strong, but because I was leaking exactly what they needed. Consciousness, emotion, stability, just unstable enough to bleed energy into their machines. The harvesting protocol had already begun, and I wasn't just part of it. I was the supply. The hallway leading to the control room no longer looked like anything designed by human hands. The walls pulsed with faint light, blue, red, then violet, like veins carrying something that wasn't blood. My footsteps echoed longer than they should have, and the air grew denser the farther I walked, as if reality itself was slowing down. I clutched the stolen admin keycard tighter. There was no turning back now. The entrance to the main control chamber sat behind a curved, unmarked panel. No label, no door frame, just a smooth metal surface with a single fingerprint scanner. Hesitated before pressing my thumb against it. The panel dissolved, not opened, dissolved, like mist vanishing in reverse. I stepped through into a circular chamber bathed in low amber light. Banks of monitors circled the perimeter, each displaying feeds from other dimensions, twisted versions of our world where the sky cracked like glass, where buildings floated, where I stood in reception desks I had never entered, bleeding from eyes I didn't remember having. At the center of the room stood the terminal, tall, brutalist, familiar. This was where the breaches were managed, or more accurately, channeled. There was no containment. There was only curation, rules that tried to guide chaos through a narrow pipe without bursting it open. And now, the pipe was leaking. On the largest monitor above the console blinked red. Text, breach event, active. Protocol degradation, 89%. Stabilizer strain. Critical, I approached slowly, my heart hammering. This was what they had built everything around. This was the beating heart of the Institute. The place where the balance between dimensions was held in check by fragile threads and by people like me. The screen changed, displaying a single prompt. Initiate dimensional reset. Yes or no. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. A reset. Wasn't without cost. The files I'd read in the harvesting archives were clear. If the stabilizers failed entirely, the dimensions would collapse into each other. A reset would forcibly sever all anchor points, purging all unstable entities, and reverting the Institute to a controlled baseline. But it came at a cost: memory loss, temporal distortion, possibly even identity fragmentation for anyone too closely entangled in the breach, which meant me. If I hit yes, I'd be gambling with who I was, who I might become, or worse, what might stay behind in my place. But if I didn't, the building would fall, the walls between dimensions would dissolve completely, and something wearing my face might not just replace me, but leave the Institute, free to walk the world outside. I took a deep breath. There was no choice. I typed yes. A new prompt appeared. Confirm user identity. A camera descended from the ceiling. A small molecular resonance scanner. I leaned forward. It buzzed. Word scanned. Then flashed green. Identity confirmed. Zhao. Mira. Anchor 18 initiating breach. Reset sequence. The chamber groaned. The lights flickered. A high-pitched whine filled. The air like metal shearing underwater, and then the floor beneath me rippled, time-bent. The control panels melted and reformed. The monitors burst into static, then cleared, one by one, to show rooms returning to normal. Empty hallways, cleansed laboratories, pods sealing shut. Creatures flickering out like bad dreams, dissipating with morning light. Then the countdown began. Reset complete. In 0059. 058. The walls began to blur. My skin tingled like every atom in my body was deciding whether to stay or go. My thoughts fragmented. I remembered my mother's voice, her laugh. Then I remembered the creature mimicking it. I remembered myself. Then, another version of me smiling with too many teeth. I clung to the console to stay grounded, focused on the screen, on the numbers. 12. 00. 11. I whispered to myself, I am me. I am real. I am not it. The lights flashed once, twice, and then everything went white. The world collapsed inward like a single breath, then exhaled again, and I was alone. When my senses returned, I was still in the control room, but everything had changed. The me. Air was still dead in a way that felt ancient. The screens had gone dark except for one, a central monitor glowing faint blue. The countdown had stopped. The breach reset was complete. But I hadn't been ejected from the system. I hadn't vanished or dissolved or turned to ash. I was still here, and so was it. The lights dimmed. From the far side of the room, something began to take shape. Not entering, but forming from the air itself, like steam freezing into geometry. Limbs emerged, slow and deliberate. Then a torso, then a face. Not mine this time. Not fully. It was a face that flickered between versions. Roke's cool stare, Dr. Breck's somber gaze, my grandmother's smile, and then mine again, split down the middle. Half of it was cracked glass. The entity didn't speak at first. It just stood there, towering and wrong, its limbs folding in ways that betrayed the idea of bone. You were not supposed to survive the loop, it finally said. Its voice was layered, my own voice repeated beneath a deeper one. You were designed to break. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The console behind me hummed softly, pulsing with residual energy. You severed the link. It continued, tilting its head. The stabilizers are offline. The harvesting has ended. My projections have collapsed. But you're still here, I said, forcing the words out through a dry throat. You're not supposed to be. It moved closer. Not walking, but drifting like light bending toward shadow. I remain because of you. You anchored me too well, Mira Zhao. You feared me so completely, needed me so deeply, that I found permanence. I backed up a step, pressing my spine to the console. You fed off me. I was you, it replied. I wore your grief like a garment. Your desperation was the doorway. Your guilt, the key. The entity paused, flickering between appearances, versions, of me at different ages, different emotional states, crying, laughing, screaming, cold. Then finally it stilled again, wearing only one face. Mine, fully, flawlessly. But we can still make a deal, it said. My stomach turned. What kind of deal? It smiled with my own mouth. A merging, a voluntary symbiosis, no more mimicry, no more instability. You become the interface. You carry me forward. I show you the structure of reality, the way through the walls, and, in return, I asked. You live, it said plainly. Your mind intact, your body whole. No more breaches, no more resets. You are remembered. I looked at the console behind me, the override switch still glowing faintly. I could rerun the purge sequence, fully wipe the system, seal every aperture, lock down the Institute forever. But it would cost me. My memories, my body, maybe even my life. I'd read enough to know that. You want access to the world outside, I whispered. You want to ride out through me. I want to belong, it said softly. Don't you? The word hung in the air. Belong. It sounded so human, so poisoned with longing. I reached into my coat and pulled out the last USB drive, the one I'd used to copy the harvesting logs, the breach schematics, and the names of every subject they'd lost. I'd rather be forgotten, I said, and I jammed it into the port. The console screen flared white. The entity screamed, not in sound but in data. Its form splintered like a corrupted file, code ripped from its surface in layers, peeling away each stolen identity. You will regret this, it roared, its voice devolving into static. I already do. I hit the purge key. The blast of energy rippled through the room like a shockwave through water. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the console glass, blinking, breathing, still me. I woke on the floor of the reception lobby, sprawled beneath the blinking red exit sign that had once buzzed like a wasp trapped in plastic. The hum was gone now. The buzz, the static, the presence. Everything was still, flat, quiet. My limbs felt like they'd been dipped in concrete and left to dry, but when I moved my fingers, they responded, slowly, distantly, like remembering how to inhabit my own body. Above me, the ceiling lights glowed a soft, steady white. No flicker. No color shifts, just ordinary fluorescent bulbs doing their job. The security monitors across the room were all off, black screens staring blankly into nothing. Even the scent in the air had changed. The musty blend of cleaning chemicals and ozone had been replaced with something sharper, sterile. Bleach, I thought as I sat up, freshly cleaned. I stood slowly, scanning the room, waiting for something, anything to twitch or glitch or crawl through the walls. But there was nothing. The salt ring was gone. The emergency buttons had been removed. Even the handbook, once a constant companion, open and inked on my desk, had vanished without a trace, and the desk, it was different too. Gone were the multiple monitors, the tangled cords, the labeled buttons for Roke and local authorities. In their place was a single laptop, and a plastic ID badge resting atop a manila envelope. I stepped forward, heart pounding. The badge still bore my name, Mira Zhao, but the title beneath had changed. Administrative Support, Day Rotation. I blinked, Day. I opened the envelope. Inside were basic onboarding forms, a standard employee handbook with zero mention of SALT, entities or breach protocols, and a welcome letter from someone named Dr. Oscar Nordstrom. The name hit me like a blow to the chest. Dr. Nordstrom had died 5 years ago. I'd seen the footage, seen him scream into a portal that swallowed him and spat out something else, something wearing a mask. But here he was listed as the current director. With an active phone extension, the building had reset, not just physically. Historically, the Institute had rewritten itself from the ground up, whitewashing every scar, every night shift, every name like mine from its walls. I was the only evidence that the nightmare had ever happened, and even I wasn't entirely sure. I'd survived it intact. Still trembling, I crossed the room and glanced at the glass lobby doors. Outside, the parking lot was bathed in morning sunlight. A bird hopped across a puddle, flapping its wings. A breeze stirred the hedges lining the path. Everything looked normal, but my reflection in the glass told a different story. I looked older, not physically, but deeper, like something in my eyes had aged a decade in a week. I pressed a palm to the glass and looked closer. For a brief second, no longer than a blink, I saw something move behind my reflection, a flicker, a twitch in the shoulder, a smile forming just a fraction too early. Then it was gone. I backed away. Breath caught in my throat. The reset had sealed the breaches. It had purged the active entities, but residue doesn't vanish so easily. And I knew in the pit of my soul that the thing I'd bargained with in the control room, it hadn't been destroyed. It had been sent back to where it came from, back to wait. And if the walls ever thinned again, if the Institute ever started its work anew, it would be there, waiting for me, for anyone, for a door to open. The reset had ended the nightmare, but it hadn't closed the book. It had just turned the page. 2 days after the reset, I found myself sitting in the downtown public library, hunched, over a microfiche reader that hadn't been touched in years. The librarian had smiled politely when I told her I was doing research for a local history paper. She didn't ask questions, just directed me to the archives section and left me alone with the flickering machine, its screen glowing a faint bluish green. The Nordstrom Institute was gone from all public records, not erased. Rewritten. News articles that once mentioned quantum experiments and government grants had been replaced with vague pieces about educational partnerships and sustainable lab design. Old photographs had been swapped out for new ones. The building's dedication plaque, originally bearing both Dr. Nordstrom's and Roke's names, now only listed Nordstrom. There was no mention of the word institute. It was now called the Nordstrom Research Center for Ethical Science. It was surgical, clinical, but sloppy in the margins. That's how I found the clue. Buried in a 7-year-old article about local zoning permits, I found an annotation that hadn't been scrubbed. A comment left by a city council staffer. The scanned handwriting was barely legible, but I squinted and leaned in. Conflicting records says Nordstrom died in 21, but then who's filing these permits? My heart stopped. They missed something. I dug deeper. Using public property records, I cross-referenced the permit approvals, employee databases and tax filings. A strange pattern emerged. Every official document regarding the Nordstrom facility from the past 5 years had been filed by an entity named Nordstrom Holdings LLC, a private company with a P.O. box and no registered board members, except for Wando Marrow. It was him, Roke, the imposter director, still operating behind a different name, still tethered to this place. Only now, from the shadows. I printed the documents, stuffing them into a folder already packed with maps, screen captures, and highlighted excerpts from the Institute's previous public-facing reports. The librarian passed by once, glancing at my pile of disorganized papers and scratched-up USB drives. She didn't comment, but as she walked away, she muttered, "We're not supposed to look too closely at them." I blinked. "Sorry, what did you say?" I asked, standing quickly. She stopped. Her smile flickered for a moment, as if her facial muscles weren't quite sure how to behave. "I didn't say anything," she replied, then walked off. But I'd heard her clearly. Them. It wasn't just about the Institute anymore. It was about something bigger, something sprawling, hidden in libraries, city archives, zoning boards, any system where records could be rewritten, where facts could be softly replaced. I left the library with a dozen pages shoved hastily into my bag. The last one, a satellite map of the Nordstrom facility, had a faint watermark on the bottom corner. Property of DARPA, classified, and underneath it, hand-scrawled in the same shaky handwriting as the zoning note. There's a sub-level. Beneath the sub-levels, one the blueprints don't show. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at that line. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The reset had cleaned the surface, but not the foundations. It was still there. Whatever had been pulled through, whatever I had bargained with, it had simply sunk deeper, buried in sealed rooms, archived in forgotten files, dormant. For now, the clue from the library wasn't just information, it was a warning. And maybe if I followed it, the start of something, even worse. I returned to the Nordstrom facility on a moonless night. The stars above were smothered by low-hanging clouds, and the streetlights lining the drive flickered inconsistently, like they were struggling to remember how to shine. The building looked different now, sleeker, colder, stripped of its former secrets. The lobby had been renovated with a glossy white interior, and a new digital kiosk stood where my old reception desk once was. Security guards in matching black uniforms patrolled the front steps. Everything was clean, polished, official. Everything was wrong. I wasn't supposed to be there. Not officially. My badge had been deactivated after the reset, and the Institute had no records of a Mira Zhao ever working the night shift. But I still remembered the timing, the rhythms, the cracks. I waited until 2:14 a.m., the exact minute that used to trigger temporal anomalies in the monitor feed, and used the service entrance near the loading bay. The old code still worked. The door hissed open like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air felt heavier, like the pressure hadn't reset along with the furniture. The hallways were brighter now, the fluorescent lights humming in a higher artificial pitch, but beneath the surface, something ancient still pulsed, like a heartbeat beneath concrete. Moved quickly, not to Lab 3, not to the observation pods or the basement corridor, but to the eastern stairwell. 3 floors down, past the last labeled level, there was a fire escape door that had never shown up on the blueprints. It was rusted, unmarked. When I pressed my hand against it, I felt warmth, radiating from within. Something was still alive down there. I descended in darkness. The stairwell twisted inward as I went, not like architecture, but like a spiral designed to compress space itself. I stopped counting steps after the 20th turn. There was no handrail, no lights, no floor indicators, just concrete and echoes. My breath felt like a foreign sound. At the bottom, I reached a room that had no door, just an opening into blackness, framed by smooth obsidian stone. Not built, grown. I stepped through and into the control room, the real one. It wasn't abandoned, not entirely. The screens were still active, though they no longer showed camera feeds. Instead, they displayed people, versions of people. Not just me, but others, subjects I'd seen in the archive files. Tara, James, Diane. Their faces were caught in loops of expression, smiling, crying, screaming, smiling again, like a reel stuck on repeat. The central platform pulsed with dim red light, and, standing on it, him, not Mr. Roke, not Dr. Nordstrom, something in between. His face shifted as I watched, like digital static corrupting a video frame. One moment he was the calm administrator with perfect posture, the next a crystal-angled monstrosity, eyes facetted like mirrors. "You came back," he said. I stepped forward. "I had to know." "You already knew," he replied with something like pity. "You just didn't accept it." "What are you?" I demanded. He tilted his head. "I'm what comes through. I'm what you opened. You were always the door." "Shut the breach," I snapped. "I sealed the Institute." "No," he said softly. "You paused the process, but you didn't delete the code." The floor beneath us shimmered, revealing glyphs etched in light. They moved, twisting like language meant for non-human minds. "You came back to end it," he said. "But the only way to end it is to let it finish." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the last USB stick, the one I'd hidden from. The reset purge. He looked almost amused. "You think data will stop me?" "No," I said, slotting it into the terminal. "But this isn't data. It's a lock." The system flared, the platform lit up, and the entity screamed. He screamed, but not with lungs. The sound came from every wall, every screen, every panel of the control room, vibrating with a frequency that drilled into my spine. The entity that had called itself Roke twisted in the flickering light, glitching from one human shape to another. My face, my grandmother's voice, Dr. Breck's weary smile. He was unraveling, shedding the masks one by one, until all that remained was light and shape and hunger. And still I stood. The USB wasn't just a lock. It was a tether breaker. Everything I'd learned, every forgotten file, every overwritten blueprint had been encoded into it. It was designed to sever the last tie between this world and the being that had infected it, not by destroying it, but by replacing its anchor. Me. The platform beneath my feet pulsed like a heartbeat, sinking to mine. I could feel the Institute's core, not its infrastructure, but its purpose, turning toward me. Every screen turned white, every feed blanked. The breach was being sealed from the inside, and I was the final gate. He reached out, not with a hand, but with will. "You don't understand," the voice pleaded now, more fragmented than ever. "You were never meant to close the door. You are the door." I looked him in the eyes, if the shards of reflective geometry still counted as such, and nodded. "Yes," I said, "and now I choose what gets through." The final command input appeared on the console. "Transfer anchor status." "Confirm?" I hit yes. There was no explosion, no rupture of time, just a slow collapsing, like reality exhaling. The screens went dark. The entity vanished, pulled backward like a thread reeling into itself. His cry faded, swallowed by a silence so deep it felt holy. Then, stillness. When I opened my eyes, I was standing alone in the center of the Institute. But something was different. The room was clearer, crisper, as if I'd stepped out of a fog I hadn't known I was in. I turned slowly and realized the screens had returned, but this time they showed one thing only: me. Not just one version, dozens, hundreds. In every reality the Institute had touched, in every dimension it had infected, there was a version of Mira Zhao. Some terrified, some confident, some broken, some already gone. And in each one something watched through them. Now it would be me. I wasn't human anymore. Not entirely. I was a watcher, woven into the folds between dimensions. The Institute had built its foundation on observers, on bait, on fear. And now it had me as its sentinel, not a door, but a lock. I could feel the breach's hunger pressing, at the edges of space, but it couldn't enter anymore, not without my permission. Outside, the world would keep turning. People would drink coffee. Traffic lights would change. Children would play. And they'd never know how close they had come to being unmade. The Institute still existed. Yes, the building would remain. The research would continue. But I would be its core, not Roke, not the entity, not Nordstrom. Me. I turned back to the console. A final message blinked softly on the screen. Protocol stabilized, system under guard. I reached up and pressed my hand against the glass. Behind the screen, my reflection stared back, eyes clear, posture still. Mira Zhao, the last anchor, the final observer. The watcher in the walls, and above the console, etched into the steel in small quiet letters. Doors swing both ways, but not unless I open them. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.